Now that your husband is dead, Dad's house needs to go to his real family. Pack your things and don't ever come back. My stepdaughter Sarah, seated across from me, announced at the lawyer's office, her voice cold as ice. Weeks later, I dropped a bombshell that left her world in ruins. I appreciate you being here. Stay with me till the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. Frank's body was barely cold in the ground, yet there she sat, flanked by her brother Michael and their mother, Linda. The same Linda who had abandoned Frank during his darkest days, and once told him he was better off not alive. I sat in that sterile conference room under the hum of fluorescent lights, a cup of stale coffee in front of me. Still wearing the black dress from yesterday's funeral, staring at these three people who had swooped in like vultures the moment Frank was gone. They looked like a pack, cold, rehearsed, and ready to pounce. Sarah and Michael, both in their 30s with kids of their own, were Frank's children from his first failed marriage. Linda's golden children, but never Frank's pride, not for as long as I knew him. Not after the way they disappeared when he needed them most. Frank and Linda had divorced when the kids were still teenagers because Linda couldn't handle Frank's addiction. So she left, took the kids, shut the door on Frank and never looked back. Told him he was too broken to be fixed. The lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled his papers uncomfortably as Sarah continued her rehearsed speech without missing a beat. Look, Bianca, we know this is hard, but let's be practical. You and Dad were only married for 11 years. Michael and I are his real children. Our children are his only real grandchildren. And this house, it has to remain in our family for generations. Michael nodded silently, just as he always did when Sarah took charge. At 34, he was still hiding behind his older sister and letting her fight his battles. 14 days should be plenty of time to pack your things and find somewhere more suitable for someone in your situation. Someone in my situation? A 56-year-old cancer patient with no children of her own, who had just lost the love of her life to liver failure. The final consequence of the drinking problem that had nearly destroyed Frank before I met him. What Sarah didn't mention, what none of them ever acknowledged, was how I had met Frank 13 years ago. He wasn't the successful financial advisor they liked to name drop. He was a broken man shattered by failure. Unemployed for 2 years, drowning his sorrows and shame in a bottle. That's when Linda left. Packed up the kids, moved across the country, and told anyone who asked that Frank had become dead weight, dragging the whole family down. She didn't stick around to help. Instead, she filed for divorce within a month. Told Frank he was too broken to be of use to anyone. And just like that, they were gone. I was working as a night shift nurse at the hospital where they brought Frank after his 3rd DUI. Liver damage, the doctors said. Keep drinking and you'll be dead within 5 years. Most people would have walked away. His own wife had. But I saw something in Frank's eyes that night. Not just the pain and shame, but a flicker of the man he used to be. The man he could be again. I didn't just nurse him back to health. I gave him a reason to get healthy. I sat through AA meetings with him. I held him during the withdrawals when he couldn't stop shaking. I cheered the first time he went 30 days sober. I helped him rebuild his confidence, his career, his entire life. When Frank started his financial advisory practice from our kitchen table, I was there, stuffing envelopes, making coffee for potential clients. I licked the stamps. I was there when our savings was $47 and a prayer. And when Frank's practice became so successful, Linda and her now adult children suddenly wanted back in after over 15 years of no contact. I watched him struggle with guilt, hope, and fear, wanting to believe his children had missed him rather than his money. But Frank was smarter than I gave him credit for. It had been years since I'd seen Linda, Sarah, and Michael, until yesterday at Frank's funeral. Sarah at least pretended to grieve. Linda looked indifferent the entire time, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. The last time she saw Frank, she demanded more money, then threatened to take him to court when he refused. Frank had laughed at her then because he'd already paid everything he was legally required to and more. He'd put money toward their children's college funds and helped them get established. But after years of being legally free from supporting his ex-wife, Linda was always demanding more money even though she was by no means broke. She worked at the same job she'd had for nearly 2 decades and fully owned her own home. She wasn't hurting for money, but she still expected Frank to fund her lifestyle. What I didn't know was what Frank had put in his will. Frank had always handled our finances and estate planning himself. He told me not to worry, especially after my cancer diagnosis just 2 months before he died. I was focused on chemotherapy, and he was taking care of everything else. I trusted him. But now, sitting here, I realized I didn't know what he'd done, or who he'd trusted in the end. Frank died during what should have been a routine outpatient procedure. I never got to ask about his final wishes. Sarah cleared her throat, bringing me back to the present moment. The will reading is just a formality, really, she said with false sympathy. Dad always intended for the house to stay with his blood family. You understand. We've already spoken with Mom about this. Michael finally spoke up, his voice stronger when talking about claiming property. She remembers Dad saying the house should go back to his first family if anything happened to him. Linda nodded firmly. Frank always felt guilty about how the divorce affected the children. This house represents their stability, their heritage. Surely you can understand that, Bianca. The way they spoke about Frank's intentions with such certainty, while I sat there knowing nothing about what my own husband had planned, was devastating. They had clearly rehearsed this conversation, planned for this moment. Meanwhile, I was still processing the fact that Frank was gone, and now learning I might lose everything we'd built together. Of course there might be some small provision for you in the will, Sarah added magnanimously. Dad wasn't heartless. But the major assets, the house, the business, those need to stay with family. I stared at these 3 people who had abandoned Frank when he needed them the most, but now spoke about family obligations and heritage with such authority. They were so confident, so certain they held all the cards. They had no idea what Frank had actually planned or how wrong they were about everything. I just hadn't opened the box yet. 2 days after that humiliating meeting at the lawyer's office, I got an unexpected knock at my door. When I opened it, I was unpleasantly greeted by Linda, Sarah, and Michael. They walked right in without asking and made themselves comfortable in my living room like they owned the place. I stood frozen in shock, watching them move through my home like vultures circling a meal. Linda plopped herself onto Frank's favorite recliner and snapped her fingers. "Cold bottled water," she demanded. Sarah smirked, and Michael obediently scurried to the kitchen without a word. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Sarah was already giggling and looking around, opening doors like she was giving herself a tour of my home. "Just wanted to see the place again," she said breezily. "Assess what needs to be done." Michael returned with the water. Linda took it without a thank you, then he joined his sister, opening cabinets and peeking into rooms like he was inspecting a property he already owned, appraising everything for dollar signs. "Oh my God, this kitchen is gorgeous," Sarah squealed from down the hall. "Look at these granite countertops. This alone is probably worth 30 grand. The master bedroom is huge," Michael shouted, his voice buzzing with excitement. "And check out this walk-in closet. Places like this are going for $500,000, easy." "Don't forget the location," Linda chimed in, casually sipping her water. "Frank always did have an eye for real estate. This neighborhood's gone way up in value." Sarah reappeared from her tour, her eyes practically glowing with greed. "Mom, we're going to be so comfortable here. I can already picture my kids running around that backyard. And the home office," Michael added, rejoining us. "Perfect for when I start my own practice. Dad really set us up, didn't he?" That's when it fully sank in. They hadn't come to visit. They came with a plan. They were already dividing up my home in their minds, treating Frank's death like a real estate opportunity. "You need to leave," I said, my voice getting stronger. "This is my house." Linda laughed from the recliner. "Oh honey, this stopped being your house the moment Frank died. We're just being practical about the transition." Sarah emerged from the hallway with a satisfied look. "Mommy, it's perfect," she said to Linda like she was a child showing off a toy. At 36 years old, she still called her mother Mommy. Linda took a long sip of water and turned back to me. "The sooner you accept reality, the easier this will be for everyone," she said calmly. "Frank's children deserve their inheritance. You're just temporary. You always were." I felt my knees go weak. These people had barged into my home, treated me like hired help, and were now discussing taking up my home while I stood there in my own living room. As if I didn't exist. The disrespect was breathtaking. But worse than their cruelty was how casual it all was. Like my grief, my home, my life, meant absolutely nothing. "Get out," I whispered. Then louder. "Get out." Linda stood, smoothing her blouse. "Now, Bianca, there's no need to get emotional. We're family after all." "You're not my family," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Frank was my family. And Frank is gone." Sarah rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with contempt. "Drama queen. Let's cut the performance, Bianca." Linda set down her bottle of water with deliberate finality. "I think it's time you faced reality about your situation." My throat tightened. "What situation?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Linda leaned in with faux concern, her tone sugar-sweet and venom-laced. "Well, honey, this house was never really yours anyway. You were just borrowing it, living here temporarily while Frank was alive." "That's ridiculous," I shot back, but my voice trembled. "Frank and I were married for 11 years. This is our home." Sarah let out a cold laugh. "Our home? Please. You moved into Dad's house, the one he built with his real family. His first family. You were basically a glorified caregiver who got promoted to wife." Michael chimed in, emboldened by Sarah's cruelty. "Honestly, the house should have gone to Mom from the start. She was Dad's true spouse. Now it belongs to his children." Linda raised a hand, pretending to be the voice of reason. "Now wait, we're not trying to be cruel. We're willing to be generous." Her tone softened, but her eyes sparkled with something far from kindness. "Bianca, I know this is hard, but let's be practical. You've got cancer, sweetheart. And let's face it, you don't have much time left. Why do you need all this space? Why keep a house you'll barely live to use?" I felt the air leave my lungs. They had researched my prognosis, calculated my life expectancy like I was a bond about to mature. Linda pressed on with her mock sympathy, almost tender. "You'd be better off in something smaller. Easier to manage for someone in your condition. Michael has a lovely mobile home you could stay in, just until you find something more permanent." "A mobile home?" I whispered, stunned. "It's very nice," Michael said quickly, like I should be grateful. "And we'd help out financially. Send you a little allowance each month until nature takes its course." Before I could respond, Sarah was pacing the marble foyer, phone in hand, filming like she was shooting content for her social media. "Okay, you guys, wait till you see this entrance," she gushed into the camera, panning across the chandelier, the curved staircase, and the antique gold mirror like she was giving a real estate tour. "This place is insane. Look at the marble. Look at the light. Ugh, dream home unlocked." She flipped the camera to herself and winked. "Manifesting works, babes. I work so hard and I deserve this. Never settle." Then she lowered her voice and added, "We're moving in soon. Big changes coming. Stay tuned." I stood frozen a few feet away, barely able to breathe. Still in the room, still in my home, watching her broadcast her conquest for likes. Michael strolled past her, grinning into the shot. "Make sure you get the fireplace," he said. "That French limestone adds serious value." Sarah spun the phone around, capturing the soaring ceilings and gold leaf trim. "Dad really left us a gem, didn't he?" Linda, sprawled across Frank's antique settee like she belonged there, added without lifting her eyes. "Don't tag the location yet. Last thing we need is strangers showing up to our parties once we're in." Sarah stopped recording and gave me a smirk. "Don't worry, we won't post anything until you're out." Then she sauntered into the formal dining room, heels clicking against the herringbone floors. "Mom, look at this crown molding. That chandelier has to be baccarat. This room alone is worth more than most condos downtown." She trailed her fingers along the carved mahogany table like it was already hers. Michael entered from the sitting room, holding one of the linen throws. "Even the blankets feel rich. This place screams old money." He looked around the room, nodding to himself. "We'd be idiots not to move in." Linda smiled, resting comfortably in a velvet armchair. "It's wasted on her. She lives like a guest in a museum. This house deserves people who know how to use it." Sarah opened the French doors to the terrace, soaking in the view. "I can already see the summer parties. String lights, jazz trio, maybe a champagne tower for my birthday." Michael wandered into the hallway, pausing in front of one of Frank's framed art pieces, an original hand-signed print that had hung there for years. He tilted his head, smirking. "This stuff belongs in a gallery," he said, then turned back toward Sarah and Linda. "We need to act fast and move in before someone else tries to make things complicated." Then he looked directly at me, still standing, still speechless. Like I was the complication. "The sooner she's out, the sooner this place can finally start feeling like ours." He took a few steps closer and added, almost kindly, almost, "You should probably start packing. We'll let you take a few pieces of furniture if they mean something to you." Sarah didn't miss a beat. "You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller anyway. A condo, maybe. Or one of those cute senior communities with shuttle service." Linda stood and adjusted her blazer like she was wrapping up a corporate deal. "We're doing you a favor. This way you can focus on your health. And we'll finally get to enjoy the legacy my husband left behind." They weren't asking. They were claiming. Dividing up the house like it was spoils of war, while I was still standing in the room. They weren't even pretending to hide their greed anymore. They were openly discussing selling my home while I stood there dying of cancer. Linda spoke with icy finality. "This house represents stability for Frank's real children. Sarah and Michael have their whole lives ahead of them. They need this inheritance. You've had your time. Besides," Sarah added cruelly, "it's not like you could give Dad children anyway. What were you, 45 years old when you got married? Your eggs were already expired." The room spun around me. These people had calculated everything. My illness. My age. My childlessness. My vulnerability. They saw Frank's death as their lottery ticket, and me as the only obstacle. "That is not happening," I said, louder than I meant to. My voice shook, but it didn't break. "This is my house. And you need to leave." Linda's fake sweetness dropped like a mask hitting the floor. "Stop being selfish, Bianca. Frank is gone. As far as we're concerned, his legitimate children are his heirs. And we decide what happens here now." Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and venomous. "You better be very careful about upsetting us. Because if you make this hard, you'll get nothing from the will. Not even the mobile home." Michael took a step closer. "Cold. Firm. We're his blood. You were just the second wife who happened to be around when he died." Linda stood up, brushing off her clothes. "Consider this your formal eviction notice. 14 days to pack up. Then transfer the deed to Sarah and Michael. Since I'm feeling generous, you can keep a few pieces of furniture for your new place." They had turned my grief into their business opportunity. My husband's death into their financial windfall. My home into their inheritance catalog. "Get out," I said again, my whole body shaking. "Get out." Somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept thinking this can't be real. But my body knew better. I grabbed my phone and started dialing. Linda shot to her feet, voice sharp with panic. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done the minute you barged in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm calling the police to get you out of my house." Michael lunged, faster than I expected. He swiped at my hand and knocked the phone from my grip. Before I could react, Sarah was on me, clawing at my hair, trying to pin my arms. "That's it," I shouted, fury fueling what strength I had left. "You either walk out of here, or I drag you out myself." I broke free from Sarah's grip and scrambled toward the kitchen, desperate to put space between us. They followed, but I made it to the corner of the room and screamed with everything I had. "Help! Neighbors! Call the police! Help me!" My voice echoed through the house. The windows were open. Mrs. Harold, my neighbor, was always tending her roses. She had to hear me. I grabbed the landline from the kitchen counter and started dialing again. "You better leave right now, or the cops will remove you by force." Michael's face turned crimson. "You ungrateful witch," he snapped. "After everything Dad did for you, this is how you repay him? You're nothing but a gold-digging caregiver who tricked a dying man." And that was it. Something inside me snapped. Years of watching them take advantage of Frank. Years of swallowing their insults, their judgment, their snide little jabs. "Are you kidding me?" I screamed, stepping forward. "You want to talk about ungrateful? You abandoned your father when he was in the gutter. You didn't call. You didn't visit. You didn't care if he lived or died." Sarah tried to cut in, but I wasn't done. "Where were you when he was shaking through withdrawals? When he lost his job? When he nearly gave up? I was there. I held him. I cleaned him up. I fought for him. I saved him, while you were off playing house with Mommy. Michael's jaw clenched. We don't owe you anything. He was our father. Then act like it. I fired back. He paid for your degrees. He got you jobs. He bailed you out every time you failed, and you never even said thank you. You're not children. You're lazy, entitled parasites. You only came back when you smelled money. That's when Linda's mask dropped completely. Her voice turned venomous. You little cancer-ridden nobody. You think you can talk to us like that? We'll tell the police you attacked us. A sick, hysterical widow who snapped. That's your plan. I scoffed. Lie to the police? Sarah crossed her arms, smug. Who do you think they'll believe? 3 family members, or one dying woman having a breakdown? I almost laughed. Almost. Then I pointed to the bookshelf behind them. Actually, you might want to look up there. They turned, eyes following my finger to the small, black security camera mounted in the corner. The red light blinked steadily. See that? I said. Frank installed motion-activated cameras in every room after the break-ins in the neighborhood last fall. Audio and video. High definition. Everything you've said, every shove, every threat, is on tape. Linda's face went white. That's not possible. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. You're bluffing. You sure? I said, retrieving my cell phone from the floor. I opened the security app and held it up. Would you like to watch the part where Michael knocked the phone out of my hand? Or Sarah yanking my hair? Or maybe Linda threatening to file a false police report? The change was instant. Smugness evaporated. Confidence shattered. Linda's hands began to shake. Now get out of my house, I said, clear and calm. And don't ever come back. Linda started backing toward the door, grabbing Sarah and Michael by their arms. We're leaving, she hissed. But this isn't over, Bianca. Oh, it's over, I said, stepping forward. And if you so much as text me again, I'll send that footage to the police, your employers, and everyone who needs to know what kind of monsters you really are. They stumbled toward the front door. Sarah crying. Michael cursing under his breath. Linda trying, failing to keep her composure. Just as they reached their car, I heard sirens in the distance. Mrs. Harold. God bless her. A patrol car pulled into the driveway as Linda fumbled to shove Sarah and Michael into their vehicle. They peeled out, tires screeching, fleeing the scene like cowards, as the officer stepped calmly from his cruiser. He knocked gently. I opened the door, still shaking. I showed him the footage. Explained the threats, the physical assault. He nodded, calm but firm. Took notes. Gave me a case number. Told me I could file charges whenever I was ready. Then he left. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let go. I sank to the floor. The adrenaline that had carried me through the chaos evaporated. Pain returned like a tidal wave, deep, bone-tired pain. My medication schedule was shot. My body ached. My lungs burned. My hands trembled. But for the first time since Frank died, I felt something other than grief and fear. I felt strong. I had stood up to them. I had protected myself, and I had won. At least for now. They thought I was just a dying widow. Fragile. Beatable. Easy to erase. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. Frank always told me, "You're stronger than you know." And today, for the first time, I finally believed him. I knew the storm wasn't over. They'd be back. They weren't done. But now, I would be ready. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since Frank died. My body still ached from the previous day's chaos, but my mind, finally, was clear. I knew what I had to do. I needed answers. Real ones. I needed to understand exactly what Frank had left behind before Linda and her children came back with lawyers. Or worse, another scheme. The drive to Cititrust Union Bank, the only bank Frank ever used, took 20 minutes. I'd been there countless times with him, but always as the quiet wife who signed where he pointed. Today felt different. I walked in with a different posture. This time I wasn't tagging along. I was here to find out the truth. Mrs. Morrison, Daniel Cole, the branch manager, greeted me with a somber nod. I'm deeply sorry about your loss. Frank was not only one of our most valued clients, he was a friend to all of us. Thank you, Daniel, I said. I need to understand what accounts Frank and I had, and what Frank really left behind. There's been some confusion about his estate, deliberately stirred, and I need clarity. Daniel studied me a moment, then gave a slight nod. There's something you should see first. Frank left very specific instructions which he made clear were to protect you. Protect me from what? Daniel hesitated. Please follow me, ma'am. He led me through 2 sets of secured doors and into the bank's vault area. The air back there was colder, sterile and still, like it had been holding its breath for years. Daniel approached one of the safe deposit drawers, unlocked it with deliberate care, and slid a long metal box toward me. This was deposited by Mr. Morrison 4 months ago, he said quietly. Sealed with instructions that it be released only to you, in person, and only if you ever came asking about the estate. I blinked. My husband had died suddenly. 11 years with him, and he'd never once mentioned a deposit box. All he ever told me was, if anything ever happens to me, drive to Cititrust Union Bank. That's all you'll need to remember. That had been our only conversation about his affairs. I'm confused, Daniel. What is this? He looked at me kindly, but didn't answer directly. Did Frank ever express concerns about his first family? He asked instead. I didn't even need to answer. I thought of Sarah filming my foyer like it was an HGTV tour. Linda in Frank's chair, issuing ultimatums. Michael knocking the phone out of my hand. Daniel went on. Ma'am, your husband safeguarded this box with us because he wanted to lock everything down. These types of deposits are structured to protect assets from inheritance disputes. They're airtight. I nodded, speechless, and took the box into my arms. Daniel placed a steadying hand on my shoulder and offered a kind smile. If you need anything at all, Mrs. Morrison, I'm always available. I murmured my thanks, then walked slowly toward the exit with the box pressed against me. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind. What was in here? A letter? Instructions? Insurance? Secrets? 1,000 possibilities. And yet I already knew. Whatever was inside, Frank had meant for it to be found only when I was ready. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. Then I placed the box gently on my lap. My fingers trembled above the clasp. I took a breath, steady deep, and opened it. The gold clasp gave way with a quiet click, like a whisper from the past. Inside were several folders, documents, account summaries, notarized forms. And right on top of them all, in Frank's familiar handwriting, was a single folded letter. Bianca, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to protect you. I hate that. But I knew this day might come, maybe sooner than either of us expected. So I did what I always said I would. I planned ahead. Not just for the money, but for you. For your peace. For your dignity. You gave me a second life, Bianca. You pulled me out of the dark. When I met you, I was a man on the edge of giving up. You didn't just save me, you restored me. Every dollar I earned after that, every second chance, every investment, every quiet win, was built on the life you gave me. I didn't tell you about what's in this box because I wanted you to heal. Not worry. But I also knew, when the time came, you'd have to be strong. People will come for what's not theirs. Especially the ones who never earned it. Especially the ones who abandoned me. Everything I built is now in your hands. It's not just money, it's peace of mind. It's proof that I saw you. That I valued you. That I chose you. Don't let them steal what we built. Love always. Frank. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears rising fast. Then I opened the rest. Frank had documented everything. Meticulously. There was a Morrison family trust created 5 years ago. I was listed as the sole beneficiary. I was not just a beneficiary. I was the only one. I blinked. I'm sorry, what trust? Inside the box were several pages. There was more. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. There was full ownership of Morrison Financial Advisory Services, which was Frank's old practice. It became restructured into a private wealth firm that now managed millions in client investments. Frank had his partner, Tom Bradley, handling day-to-day operations while Frank retained ownership through the trust. In a folder marked legal, I found the contact info for Tom Bradley and a note saying he was fully aware of my rights. I also found copies of the trust documents, the deeds, and a financial statement showing the current trust balance as of last quarter. My head spun as I continued pulling up papers after papers in this box. Multiple investment portfolios here. Conservative bonds, growth stocks, international markets. Frank was meticulous. Diversified. Conservative. As I checked statement after statement, what Frank left me kept climbing. There were also 3 downtown rental properties and our primary residence, all under the trust's name. With me, the sole beneficiary. This has to be a mistake, I said, staring at it all. We lived well. We traveled, we ate at nice places. We had beautiful things, but nothing like this. Frank was very intentional. He didn't believe in showing off, but he believed in living well. He told me once, comfort is the reward for surviving what we've been through. But security? That's what protects the person you love. I stared at them, stunned. There were no ambiguities. What did he leave his children? I flipped to the beneficiary summary sheet. Sarah and Michael were left 1 car each, Frank's 2018 Honda Civic and a 2020 Camry. A cash gift of $100,000 split between them. And Linda, just $1,000 and a few personal items from their former marriage. That was it. The rest, the properties, the firm, the investments, the income, all of it was mine. The total trust value? $4.7 million. As of that date, my net worth was approximately $4.7 million, not counting monthly income from the firm and properties. I felt the car tilt. $4.7 million. While Linda told me to move into a mobile home. While Sarah plotted to flip my house for a quick $600,000. While they called me a gold digger who had nothing. He did all this without telling me? The numbers on the balance sheets didn't make sense. They were too big. This can't be right, I whispered. I felt like I was hearing about someone else's life. I sat back, stunned. And that was when I found another note from Frank. It read, "You won't have to depend on anyone. Ever. They'll call you names, gold digger, second wife, fake widow. I know them. I know how they think. But they didn't sit beside me during chemo. They didn't clean up after I relapsed. You did. Only you. You were never temporary to me, Bianca. You were home. Use this box as armor. Use it as a weapon if you must. I'm sorry I didn't prepare you more directly. But I believed in you too much to think you'd ever need hand-holding. If you're opening this box, then you're already stronger than you think. I love you. Forever and only. Frank." I sat in the bank parking lot for 30 minutes, staring at the folders of documents in my lap. Frank hadn't just protected me. He'd made me wealthy. Independent. Untouchable. Linda, Sarah, and Michael thought they were dealing with a desperate widow who had nowhere to turn. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who owned a multi-million-dollar financial empire. They wanted to play games with inheritance and legal threats? Perfect. Now I had the resources to play back. And I intended to win. 14 days. That's exactly how long I waited. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I called Tom Bradley from Morrison Financial and arranged a meeting. I retained 3 estate attorneys, all with aggressive reputations. I had every document Frank left me photocopied, notarized, and sealed. Most importantly, I had security cameras installed in every room of the house, motion-triggered, audio-equipped, and uploading in real time directly to cloud storage. If Linda and her children wanted to play games, I was going to make sure every word was documented. On the 14th day, at exactly 10 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Linda, Sarah, and Michael walking toward my front door with the confidence of people who believed they were about to inherit an empire. What they didn't see was the black sedan parked across the street, containing my attorney, Richard Santos, and the process server beside him. I opened the door before they could knock. "Right on time," I said. "Please come in." They brushed past me into the living room, and I could see the satisfaction on their faces. They thought this was going to be easy. Sarah was already looking around the room like she was mentally redecorating. Linda sank into Frank's chair again, like it still belonged to her. "Bianca, I'm glad you've come to your senses. We brought some paperwork to make the transition smooth." Michael stepped forward with a folder. "We had our attorney draft the deed transfer. All you need to do is sign, and we can start moving your things out this weekend." "How thoughtful," I said, keeping my voice light. "But before we sign anything, there are some people I'd like you to meet." I walked to the door and opened it again. Richard Santos stepped in, followed by a suited man carrying a briefcase and a camera. "Everyone," I said calmly, "this is my attorney, Richard Santos. And this gentleman is here to serve legal documents." The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Linda's confident smile slipped. Sarah froze mid-stride. Michael's posture stiffened. "What is this?" Linda demanded, already on edge. "This," I said, "is me protecting what's mine. Richard, would you please explain the contents of Frank's estate?" Richard set his briefcase down, opened it, and pulled out a thick folder. "Mrs. Morrison asked me to review her late husband's estate, will and trust documents. I've come to clarify what each of you has inherited." He laid out a stack of papers on the coffee table. "First, Mr. Morrison's children, Sarah and Michael. You have each inherited one vehicle, a 2018 Honda Civic and a 2020 Camry, and a total of $100,000 to be split evenly. That's the full extent of your inheritance." Sarah's face went white. "That's impossible. Dad left us the house, the business, everything." "I'm afraid not," Richard said. "The house has been owned by the Morrison Family Trust for the past 5 years. Mrs. Morrison is the sole beneficiary of that trust." "What trust?" Michael said, his voice cracking. I stepped in. "The trust Frank built to protect his assets from exactly this situation. He saw you coming from miles away." Richard pulled out another document. "Morrison Financial Advisory Services is also fully owned by the trust. That means Mrs. Morrison now owns the business, including all client accounts, equity, and ongoing revenue." Linda tried to keep her composure. "That's ridiculous. I was Frank's wife for 15 years. I have rights." "You did," Richard replied coolly. "But you divorced Mr. Morrison. And according to the decree, you waived all claims to future assets. Your inheritance is $1,000 and a few personal items from the original settlement. Nothing more." "This is a mistake," Sarah snapped. "We need to contest this. Get our own lawyer." "You're welcome to try," I said. "But everything's been properly documented, legally executed, and verified." Frank was extremely thorough. I reached into the folder and laid down a set of handwritten letters, Frank's letters. He also left these, in his own words, explaining exactly why. Michael grabbed one and started to read. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. "He says we abandoned him," he muttered. "That we only came back for money. Didn't you?" I asked softly. Linda's face twisted, her mask finally cracking. "You manipulative witch. You turned Frank against his own children." Linda stood up. "This is insane. Frank would never cut out his own children." "Frank didn't cut you out," I said. "He gave you exactly what you earned, which after 11 years of no contact was $50,000 each and 2 cars. But the house is worth over $1 million, Sarah protested. "The business has to be worth more than that for us to get just $50,000. Richard consulted his papers. "Actually, the trust assets are valued at approximately $4.7 million. The business alone generates over $300,000 annually." The silence in the room was deafening. I watched as the reality hit them one by one. They weren't inheriting a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. They were walking away with less money than some people make in a single year, while I controlled a multi-million-dollar empire. Sarah's voice trembled. She was crying now. "We planned our whole lives around this inheritance. We took out loans." "That's unfortunate," I said. "And that's not the best way to live. That's wishful thinking." "This can't be legal," Michael said desperately. "There has to be a way to challenge this." Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison anticipated that reaction, which is why he included one more provision in the trust. He pulled out a document and slid it forward. "If any beneficiary contests the trust or attempts to sue Mrs. Morrison, the bequest is forfeited in full. That means the cars, the cash, gone." The room fell into a stunned silence. The process server stepped forward. "I have documents for all 3 of you." He handed each of them an envelope. "These are cease and desist orders regarding Mrs. Morrison's property. You are permanently banned from this residence and from contacting Mrs. Morrison in any way." Linda lunged forward and ripped open her envelope. You can't ban us from family property. It's not family property, Richard replied. It's Mrs. Morrison's private residence, owned by a legally binding trust. You have no claim. Michael was staring at his cease and desist order in shock, completely hollowed out. But we're family. No, I said, standing up. You're strangers who share DNA with my late husband. Frank's real family was the people who were there when he needed them. Sarah looked around the room one last time, her eyes taking in all the wealth she'd thought was hers. This isn't over, Bianca, she spat. Actually, Richard said, it is. And if you contact Mrs. Morrison again or set foot on this property, criminal charges will follow. We have security footage of your prior visits, verbal threats, attempts at forced eviction. It's more than enough. Linda, Sarah, and Michael stood there for a moment looking like they'd been hit by a truck. They stood in silence, stripped of the confidence they'd swaggered in with. Three people who had built castles in the air, and now had to return to reality. You need to leave now, I said. And don't come back. They walked slowly toward the door in stunned silence. At the threshold, Linda turned back one last time. Her voice was low, bitter. Frank would be ashamed of what you've become. I looked her dead in the eyes. Frank planned every detail of this moment. He knew exactly what I'd become. Strong enough to protect what we built together. The door clicked shut behind them. From the window, I watched them drive away. Sarah crying, Michael yelling, Linda silent, staring straight ahead, like someone watching their future burn. Richard packed his papers. They might try again. A challenge based on undue influence or mental incapacity. Will it hold up? Not even close. The trust was created long before Frank's illness. He had independent legal counsel and years of clean medical records. It's bulletproof. After he left, I sat in the quiet. For the first time since Frank died, I wasn't afraid. I owned everything. The house, the business, the rentals, the investments. Linda, Sarah, and Michael had spent 2 weeks planning new lives on fantasies. Borrowing against money that was never theirs. Now they had to crawl back to their real lives with 2 used cars and $101,000 split 3 ways. Frank had protected me in ways I was only beginning to understand. But more than that, he'd ensured that the people who'd abandoned him would never profit from his death. Frank hadn't just protected me. He had armed me. I picked up one of his letters and read it again. Use this box as armor. Use it as a weapon if you must. Today I'd done both. And I was just getting started. I thought that was the end of it, but letting things go was never something Linda would do. 3 days after the confrontation, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. Friends from the hospital where I used to work. Neighbors. Even some of Frank's old business contacts. At first I thought they were reaching out to offer support. I was wrong. Bianca, I'm so sorry to hear about the situation with Frank's kids. I had no idea things were so bad between you all. Saw the posts about Frank. Is it true he never helped Sarah and Michael financially? Girl, what is going on with the inheritance drama? Social media is going crazy. I tried logging into Facebook to see what they were talking about, but discovered I'd been blocked by Linda, Sarah, and Michael. Their profiles were private to me, but apparently very public to everyone else. That's when my friend Jessica from the hospital called. Bianca, honey, I don't know if you've seen what they're posting, but it's bad. Really bad. What are you talking about? Linda and Sarah have been posting nonstop for 2 days. They're saying Frank cut them out of his will because you manipulated him while he was sick. That you convinced him his children didn't love him. My stomach dropped. What exactly are they saying? That Frank was a deadbeat dad who abandoned his family. That he never paid child support and emotionally abused them. Linda posted copies of what she claims are unpaid support documents. Jessica, those have to be fake. Frank paid everything he was required to and more. I figured, but Bianca, they're also saying you bribed the lawyer. That you had Frank declared mentally incompetent so you could control his finances. And there's worse. Worse how? They're posting photos of your house claiming Frank stole it from Linda during the divorce. Sarah made this whole video about how you're living in their childhood home while they can't afford rent. I felt sick. Can you screenshot everything? I need to see exactly what they're saying. Already did. Sending them now. My phone lit up with message after message as Jessica forwarded the screenshots. Linda had posted a long emotional essay about being a forgotten widow who lost everything when Frank remarried. She claimed Frank had promised to take care of his first family, but that I'd poisoned him against his children. Sarah's posts were even worse. She'd created an entire narrative about growing up poor while her father lived in luxury with his new wife. She posted childhood photos with captions like, "Last Christmas before Daddy chose money over family," and begging Dad to help with college while he bought his mistress a mansion. But the most damaging posts were the ones claiming Frank had been mentally declining for years and that I'd taken advantage of his illness to steal his money. Michael had shared a post claiming I'd forged Frank's signature on the trust documents and paid off the lawyer to declare Frank incompetent. The comments were brutal. Hundreds of people expressing outrage at my supposed greed and manipulation. People were calling me a gold digger, a manipulator, and worse. They were sharing the posts demanding justice for Frank's real family. I screenshot everything and printed it out. Page after page of lies and character assassination. They weren't just trying to get money anymore. They were trying to destroy my reputation and Frank's memory. The next morning brought even more messages. This time from Frank's former clients who'd seen the posts. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm concerned about the allegations regarding your husband's mental state. Should I be worried about my investments? Bianca, I hate to ask, but were the rumors about Frank's competency true? I'm thinking of moving my portfolio." I realized what Linda and her children were doing. They couldn't contest the will legally without losing their inheritance, but they could try to destroy the business through social media. If enough clients lost confidence in Frank's mental state when he created the trust, they might pull their investments. That's when I called Richard Santos. "Richard, they're trying to destroy Frank's reputation and the business. We need to stop this. What exactly are they posting?" I read him some of the worst accusations. Claims that Frank was mentally incompetent, that I'd forged documents, that the trust was invalid because Frank wasn't capable of making decisions. "Those are serious allegations," Richard said. "If they're false, we can sue for defamation. But more importantly, if they're claiming Frank was mentally incompetent when he created the trust, that could give them grounds to challenge it." "But you said the trust was bulletproof." "It is if Frank was competent when he created it. But if they can convince people he wasn't, then we have a problem. Even if they're lying, if enough clients believe them and pull their money, the business could collapse." I felt the walls closing in. They couldn't win legally, so they were trying to win in the court of public opinion. What do? We fight back. I'll file defamation suits against all three of them for the false statements about Frank's mental capacity. But we also need to counter their narrative with facts. How? Frank's medical records. The independent legal counsel who helped create the trust. Testimony from Tom Bradley about Frank's business competence. We prove not just that Frank was mentally sound, but that he specifically anticipated this exact scenario. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printed screenshots of lies and character assassination. They'd turned Frank's death into a social media war and dragged our private grief into public spectacle. But as I read through Frank's letters again, I realized something. He'd warned me about this too. The note that said people would call me names. Gold digger, second wife, fake widow. He'd known they would try to destroy me when they couldn't steal from me. Frank hadn't just protected my financial future. He'd left me the weapons to protect my reputation too. Linda, Sarah, and Michael thought they could win through lies and manipulation. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who had Frank's entire legal and financial arsenal at my disposal. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. And this time, I wouldn't just defend what Frank left me. I would make them pay for every lie they'd told. The next morning, I was done playing defense. I called Richard Santos first thing. "I want to file defamation suits against all three of them. Every false claim documented. And I want to go public with the truth. Are you sure? Once we escalate this publicly, there's no going back." They made it public when they started lying about Frank's mental health. Now they get to face the consequences. Richard's voice brightened. Then let's destroy them properly. I'll file in federal court for maximum impact. Defamation, libel, intentional infliction of emotional distress and interference with business relations. We'll ask for damages in the millions. How quickly can we move? I'll have the papers filed by noon. But Bianca, we need to be strategic about this. They're counting on people believing their emotional story over legal facts. We need to flip that narrative completely. What do you suggest? A press conference. Frank's medical records proving perfect mental capacity. The independent legal counsel who created the trust. Tom Bradley testifying about Frank's business acumen. But most importantly, we release Frank's letters explaining exactly why he structured things this way. The idea of making Frank's private thoughts public felt wrong, but then I remembered his words. Use this as armor. Use it as a weapon if you must. Do it. By 2 p.m., Richard had filed a $10 million defamation lawsuit against Linda, Sarah, and Michael. The local news picked up the story within hours. Wealthy widow sues stepchildren for false claims about late husband's mental health. But Richard wasn't finished. He'd also arranged for something else. Tom Bradley called me that afternoon. Mrs. Morrison, I've been watching what they're posting about Frank online. It's disgusting. That man was sharp as a tack right up until he died. Would you be willing to go on record about that? More than willing. Frank was my mentor and my friend. These people abandoned him when he needed them most, and now they're trying to destroy his memory for money. It makes me sick. The next morning, Richard held a press conference on the steps of the courthouse. Local news outlets attended, along with reporters from the Business Journal. My client, Mrs. Morrison, has been the victim of a coordinated defamation campaign by her late husband's estranged family, Richard began. Today we're setting the record straight with facts, not Facebook posts. He held up Frank's medical records. Dr. Patricia Williams, Frank Morrison's primary physician, will testify that he showed no signs of cognitive decline at any point. His last mental status exam 6 months before his death showed perfect capacity. Next, he introduced Dr. Alan Stone, the independent attorney who'd helped Frank create the trust. Mr. Morrison sought my legal counsel specifically because he wanted to ensure his estate planning couldn't be challenged on competency grounds. He was extraordinarily thorough and completely lucid throughout our months of collaboration. Tom Bradley stepped forward. I worked with Frank Morrison for 11 years. 6 months before he died, he negotiated a complex multi-million-dollar client acquisition that required incredible attention to detail. The man who created that trust was operating at full mental capacity. But the most devastating part came when Richard read excerpts from Frank's letters. Mr. Morrison wrote, "People will come for what's not theirs. Especially the ones who never earned it. Especially the ones who abandoned me." He specifically anticipated this exact scenario, including attempts to claim mental incompetency. Richard paused for effect. Mr. Morrison also wrote, "They'll call you names. Gold digger. Second wife. Fake widow. I know them. I know how they think." This wasn't the decision of a confused man. This was the careful planning of someone who knew exactly what his estranged family would do. The questions from reporters were brutal. Is it true the children haven't seen their father in 11 years? Did they really abandon him during his addiction? How much money are they claiming they deserved? Richard answered each one with devastating precision. By the time the press conference ended, Linda, Sarah, and Michael looked like exactly what they were. Greedy, estranged relatives trying to profit from a man they'd abandoned. That evening, my phone started ringing with a very different kind of call. "Bianca, this is Margaret Chansone from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your husband's legacy and the false claims being made against him." "Mrs. Morrison, this is David Park from the Business Journal. Our readers are very interested in your husband's estate planning strategies and how he protected his assets." But the most satisfying call came from Jessica at the hospital. "Girl, the tide has turned completely. Linda deleted all her posts and Sarah's crying on Instagram about being misunderstood. The comments are savage. People are calling them gold diggers and deadbeat family members. I checked social media for myself. The story had gone viral, but now the narrative was completely different. #Justice for Frank was trending. People were sharing Frank's story as an example of brilliant estate planning. The comments on Linda and Sarah's remaining posts were brutal. Imagine abandoning your father during addiction, then claiming you deserve his money. These people are disgusting. They disappeared for 11 years, then showed up with their hands out. Frank Morrison was a genius. He saw right through these parasites. But the most important response came from Frank's business clients. Instead of pulling their investments, they were expressing confidence in his planning and praising his foresight. If Frank Morrison was smart enough to predict and protect against this kind of family manipulation, he was definitely smart enough to manage my portfolio. The fact that Morrison anticipated this exact scenario and planned for it makes me trust his judgment even more. 3 days after the press conference, Richard called with an update. They want to settle. All of them. Linda's attorney called this morning. The defamation case is airtight, and they know it. But more importantly, the negative publicity is destroying them. Sarah lost her job. Michael's being investigated by his employer for financial irregularities. And Linda's being sued by other family members who invested money based on her claims about the inheritance. What are they offering? Complete public retraction of all statements. Formal written apology acknowledging Frank's mental competency and your legitimate ownership of all assets. And they'll pay your legal fees. That's it. Oh, and they're also offering to forfeit their inheritance entirely. The cars and the cash. They want it all to go away. I thought about Frank's words. Use this as a weapon if you must. No settlement, I said. I want this to go to trial. I want a jury to hear every detail of how they abandoned Frank and then tried to destroy his memory. I want them to face the full consequences of their lies. Bianca, that could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. I can afford it. And they can't. Let them spend every penny they have fighting a case they can't win while the whole world watches them lose. Richard was quiet for a moment. You've changed since this started. Frank armed me for war. Now I'm fighting it. Linda, Sarah, and Michael had wanted to play games with reputations and public opinion. They'd turned Frank's death into a social media circus and tried to destroy everything he'd built. Now they were about to learn what happened when you declared war on someone who had unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. The trial would be their public humiliation, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The trial was set to begin in 6 months, but it never happened. 2 weeks before jury selection, Linda, Sarah, and Michael's attorney called Richard with a desperate plea. My clients want to settle. They're prepared to do whatever Mrs. Morrison requires. I met with Richard to discuss their offer. They were willing to issue complete public retractions of all their statements, forfeit their entire inheritance, and pay all my legal fees. But most importantly, they wanted to avoid the public humiliation of a trial. What do you think? Richard asked. I thought about Frank's letters, about his advice to use the box as armor and as a weapon if I must. I'd already used it as both. The defamation lawsuit had achieved something more valuable than money. It had completely destroyed their credibility and shown the world who they really were. I'll accept their surrender, I said. But I want everything documented in public. The settlement was brutal for them, but merciful compared to what a trial would have brought. Linda, Sarah, and Michael issued formal public apologies acknowledging that all their statements about Frank's mental capacity were false. They admitted that Frank Morrison was completely competent when he created his trust, and that I was the rightful owner of all his assets. They forfeited their entire inheritance, the cars and the $100,000 in cash, which went directly into the Morrison family trust. They paid my legal fees, which totaled over $300,000. Most importantly, they signed agreements never to contact me again or make any public statements about Frank or his estate. Linda's public apology video looked like a hostage confession. I want to publicly apologize to Bianca Morrison for the false statements I made about her and her late husband Frank. I was angry about being excluded from Frank's will, and I let that anger cloud my judgment. Frank Morrison was mentally competent when he created his trust, and Bianca Morrison is the rightful owner of all his assets. I jumped the gun because I thought my children deserved more, but I was wrong. Frank made his choices for good reasons, and I should have respected that. Sarah's apology was even more pathetic. She blamed everything on her mother's influence while claiming she'd been manipulated into believing lies about Frank's mental state. Michael barely managed to read his statement on camera, his voice shaking with humiliation. But the most satisfying part wasn't their public humiliation. It was watching them face the real-world consequences of their greed without me having to destroy them completely. Sarah lost her job after the settlement publicity made her unemployable in her field. Michael's accounting license was suspended for ethics violations related to the case. Linda ended up moving in with her sister in another state, working part-time retail to pay rent. I had shown them mercy by not pursuing the full trial, but that mercy came with complete surrender. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The business thrived. Tom Bradley and I expanded Morrison Financial into new markets, using Frank's reputation for integrity as our foundation. Clients appreciated knowing their advisor had been smart enough to predict and protect against family manipulation. My cancer went into complete remission. The stress of the inheritance battle had been replaced by the peace of financial security and legal vindication. But the most amazing discovery came 6 months after the entire experience. When I was going through Frank's papers one final time, hidden in his desk drawer, I found an envelope marked for Bianca, when everything is settled. Inside was the deed to a property I'd never heard of. A lakeside estate 3 hours north of the city. Frank had bought it 5 years ago, the same time he created the trust, and titled it directly in my name. There was also a final letter. My darling Bianca, if you're reading this, then you survived the storm I knew was coming. You stood up to people who tried to take what we built together, and you won. I bought this place for us to retire to someday. Somewhere peaceful where you could heal completely and live exactly as you choose. I always pictured you sitting on the deck in the morning with your coffee, watching the sun rise over the water. I'm sorry I won't be there to see it with you. But knowing you're safe and free and able to live without depending on anyone's charity gives me more peace than I can express. You gave me a second life, Bianca. Now live your second life for both of us. All my love always. Frank. P.S. Check the boat house. I may have left you one more surprise. The boat house contained a restored 1967 Chris Craft speedboat with Bianca's Freedom painted on the stern. I moved to the lake house that fall. Every morning I sit on the deck with my coffee exactly as Frank had pictured, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. The house is peaceful and private, with enough room for me to host the few people who matter and enough space to enjoy solitude when I choose it. Tom Bradley drives up once a month to discuss business over dinner. We've become genuine friends, something I never expected. My cancer support group meets here quarterly for weekend retreats. Mrs. Harold visits from the old neighborhood and brings her grandchildren to fish from my dock. But most evenings, I sit alone on the deck reading Frank's letters and feeling grateful for the man who loved me enough to wage war on my behalf from beyond the grave. Linda, Sarah, and Michael disappeared from my life completely after the settlement. Sometimes I wonder if they think about Frank when they remember what they lost, if they ever regret choosing greed over gratitude. But mostly I don't think about them at all. I kept Frank's final letter framed on my nightstand next to the photo from our wedding day. Sometimes I read it aloud to him before bed. You gave me a second life, Bianca. Now live your second life for both of us. I am Frank. Every single day I am. The woman who used to worry about imposing on people, who apologized for taking up space, who tried to make herself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort, is gone. In her place is someone who knows exactly what she's worth and won't accept less than she deserves. Frank didn't just protect my financial future. He taught me to protect my own dignity. Sometimes people ask if I forgive Linda, Sarah, and Michael for what they put me through. The question always surprises me because forgiveness implies I'm still carrying their burden. I'm not. I released them the day the judge read the verdict. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to anger about people who no longer matter in my life would dishonor everything Frank built for me. They made their choices. They faced the consequences. I live my life. That's not forgiveness. That's freedom. And freedom, as it turns out, is the most beautiful revenge of all. I never thought I'd be in this position. But I did what any woman would do when backed into a corner. I stood up. If this story moved you, if it sparked memories of someone you're fighting for, or someone you finally found the courage to stand up to, then take a second. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And drop a comment below. I read every one. This is a space where your voice matters. If you want more true stories about the breaking points that change everything, subscribe to Betty's Stories and turn on notifications. More stories are coming. Because in a world that tries to silence the betrayed, sharing your story is an act of courage.